The Poco X4 GT might be the most interesting phone Poco's released all year, but how's the camera performance? Let's look at some photo and video samples from the stock Poco camera, as well as from a Google Camera port from developer BSG, which I'll link in the video description. Both the stock Poco camera on the left and GCam on the right do a good job with these 4 shrubs, or trees, or whatever they are, but GCam is able to pull more detail and color out of both the shrub trees and the mulch on the ground. The sack of oranges shot is pretty terrible for both camera apps. GCam oversaturates the red netting and the oranges and manages to crush the blacks and the shadows. It's a weird image. Stock camera does a much better job but still looks washed out. GCam wins for this flower bush shot. It's more colorful and feels livelier. I just wish it was a bit brighter like the stock camera. There's something else about that stock image I just don't like, but I can't quite figure it out. I'll keep trying though. Here's an umbrella, and while GCam pops the color more drastically, I prefer the stock camera this time since it retains the colors well and has a bit more detail in the fabric. I was really surprised that both apps were able to capture a sharp image of this bush because it was very windy and this wispy thing was moving around a lot. I prefer the extra green from GCam here. Both apps again kind of failed this time. The emergency exit sign, which I so wanted to push but I probably didn't, looks radioactive according to GCam, which clipped the reds hard, so much so that you can't even tell there's braille on the sign. Stock looks more natural but also very soft, like it just missed focus, and it's just a bland, low contrast image. This building shot turned out well on both. I only wish GCam wouldn't have crushed the shadows and that the stock camera was more saturated. I have to say, we've made it this far and the stock camera hasn't really blown out any images or crushed the blacks, which I've seen most Poco cameras struggle with, so it's great to see some improvement. And that's true for the street great shot. GCam is more detailed, but not much. Alright, I think I figured out what I don't like in these stock camera images. The Poco camera is not handling background blur or bokeh well. It just looks mushy. Even with this van shot, the differences between the trees is significant. I'm not sure if GCam's punchy, saturated look is just masking the same issue as the stock cam, but whatever it's doing, it ends up looking better. For this chrome pipe statue, I'm not happy with either image. Stock needs a bit more color, and GCam pushed the shadows down too far, especially in the trees. I wanted to see just how well the X4 GT would handle bokeh, and again, it's not great. It kind of smears parts of the image. GCam wins for color and brightness though. For this last image before we get into selfies, I wanted to see how well both handle low light when it's not quite dark enough to use night mode. The stock camera easily wins in my opinion, much more detailed and crisp. GCam is just a more colorful mess. Before we get into the selfies, night shots, and video performance tests, if you're finding this video helpful, please give it a like. I genuinely appreciate it. This first selfie from the main rear camera looks pretty good on both. Obviously GCam is more saturated, but I think it goes too far this time. Rear camera again, but with portrait mode on. Both apps do a good job without any weird artifacts around my face, and the artificial blurring of the background looks fine as well. The front-facing selfie camera is a different story. Both images are usable, but much poorer than the rear camera. Definitely go with GCam for anything with the selfie camera. Keep in mind that beautify mode is on by default in the stock app, so this is me beautified. GCam struggles a bit with portrait mode on the selfie camera. Luckily, the subject detection only seems to have issues with my shirt and not the money maker. Night mode is the area where these apps are the most different. Take this first shot of the night sky. GCam goes all out with warmer orange colors and cranks up the brightness, which makes the lens flares from the street light even worse. It's not as noisy as the much more accurately lit stock image, but that's the only nice thing I can say about it. GCam also takes a lot longer to capture all the frames and then stack them, so much so that you can see the progression of a plane that was flying right here. I don't know what this is though. Let's zoom in. Oh no. Both did a very good job with this figure on a pizza box shot. The room was very dark, and I'm amazed both were able to produce relatively sharp, noise-free images. GCam sacrifices some detail for more light with this car photo. The stock camera ruins the sky, but the cars themselves are a bit more crisp than GCam. Once again, I think both apps do a pretty bad job with this fire hydrant. Stock camera's sharp, but looks a little too overprocessed. GCam looks more natural, but too soft and yellow. Here's some jewelry, and stock camera wins since it looks more natural with more detail. GCam is just too oversaturated and a little mushy in some parts. GCam totally misses the streetlight shot, blowing out the highlights in a blurry mess. Poco's stock camera isn't amazing here, but it's usable. Here's a night selfie of me from the main rear camera, and both are fine, but I prefer the muted colors from the stock cam. Strangely, the front-facing selfie camera takes the better night shot for both apps, but I prefer the less noisy GCam image. For a quick comparison between another Poco device that is roughly $100 cheaper in many regions, I brought out the F3. For this umbrella shot using the stock cameras, I prefer the F3. The X4 GT might have a bit more texture in the fabric, but the red, orange, and yellow colors almost morph into each other, just too unnaturally saturated. The X4 GT doubles down on the saturation with GCam, and the F3 easily wins. Here's that emergency exit that I totally did not use, and the F3 wins again. More natural color, and even the door looks normal, not like a mushy mess. Again, when GCams are used, the F3 clearly wins. What about selfies? The X4 GT wins when using the stock Poco camera. It has more detail and a better bokeh effect. Same story with portrait mode on the rear cameras. This time the F3 even messed up the subject detection down here in this corner. The actual selfie camera on both disappoint. The F3 blows out the highlights, but looks good otherwise. The X4 GT controls the highlights better, but just looks much less vibrant. Same story with the portrait mode active. X4 GT wins as far as I'm concerned, but it's pretty close. I'd say it's a tie for the figure on a pizza box shot. With the GCam version, the X4 GT really cranks up the blues, but both are still a tie for me. Now time for video, and it's disappointing. Even on the stock cam, stabilization is rough, and you can enable steady video mode, but then you're restricted to filming in 1080 at 30 FPS. GCam is just a bland, mushy mess. Results are actually better from the selfie camera, but GCam definitely loses.
Here's selfie video from the stock cam. Alright, here's selfie video from GCam.
Comparing the stock apps from the X4 GT and the F3 wins easily. Decent image quality and much better stabilization at 4K. When it comes to selfie video though, the footage follows the same theme from the photos. Blown out on the F3, better detail from the X4 GT. Stabilization is about the same.
Here's selfie video from the stock cam. And here's selfie video from the Poco F3.
What about third-party camera apps like Filmic Pro? It can help a little bit, possibly. Filmic doesn't blow out the clouds, and maybe it's slightly more stable. I did turn on electronic image stabilization in Filmic. Selfie cameras, I purposely underexposed in Filmic to avoid clipping the sky. But if you disregard that, I'd still say Filmic loses due to a lack of stabilization.
Here's Filmic, and here's the Poco stock cam.
One last video sample. I wanted to include this because it shows a difference in performance for this new MediaTek chip in the X4 GT. This is raw footage from MotionCam, and Snapdragon processors seem to be the best at processing the footage right now, as you can probably tell. I'm hitting 30 FPS on the Snapdragon 870 powered Poco F3, but only around 14 FPS on the MediaTek Dimensity 8100 in the X4 GT. Overall, I'm not impressed with the X4 GT's cameras. Yes, GCam helps in some situations, and I did shoot all of the GCam images using HDR plus enhanced, which absolutely contributed to some of the way too saturated photos, so changing those settings can improve the look further. One area where GCam did not help was with video. Video is rough on the X4 GT. If you're trying to choose between the X4 GT and the Poco F3, and you want the better camera, I would go with the F3. I'll link my full review of the X4 GT right here when it's ready, and if you have any questions, please leave a comment, and I will answer them perfectly. Don't ask anyone else, just me.